I'm Richard Gage. I'm an architect, and I've started the Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. I've been an architect for 20 years, and I've worked in most types of building construction, from residential, commercial, office, retail, you name it. I'm currently working on a large project in Nevada with over 360,000 square feet of high-rise office space and 1 million square feet of retail, including a couple of parking garages, all in all over about 1,200 tons of steel framing. I was on my way to a construction site when I heard on the radio David Ray Griffin being interviewed. I had never heard anything about the World Trade Center other than the official story, and what I heard from him being interviewed on KPFA in Berkeley, California, was shocking to me. I heard evidence of controlled demolition, and I had to pull over and listen to the rest of this interview. He was talking about beams being hurled 500 feet laterally, concrete being pulverized, no stacks of 110 floors at the bottom of the World Trade Center. It went on and on and on, including sounds and sights of explosions heard by 118 fire and other first responders. I was moved to find out if this is true or not, and over the last 14 months I determined that this is indeed true, and it changed my world, turned it upside down, in fact, inspiring me to found the Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth.
In your quest over that year plus to investigate the claims of David Ray Griffin, was it a gradual realizing that the official story was a fraud, or did it finally, was there a flashpoint where you just, then all the pieces came together?
I'd have to say it was pretty quick, because everything made sense. There's no part of the official story that made sense. As I reread the official story in light of the evidence for controlled demolition, it fell together pretty rapidly, and I knew what I had to do within a couple of weeks. It just came to me. We had pilots for 9/11 Truth. We have scholars for 9/11 Truth. I said, where are the architects and engineers? Who's pulling them together? There was nobody. So I founded the Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. We had one. I was the first one. Then we had the second one. Now we have 160 altogether. And within 1 year, we'll have 1,000. The first presentation that I gave to the firm that I worked for, of 15 architects, almost all of whom were skeptical. I would say 14 out of 15 signed up. So that got me to 16 architects. When architects and engineers see this information, they can't not agree with most of it. Some don't agree with all of it, but they're moved. And 14 of these signed up to call upon Congress to demand a new investigation of the events of 9/11, an investigation that's unimpeachable and with subpoena power.
How important is Kevin Ryan's story early on when he becomes aware in his own firm that they've done a secret study and found that the official story doesn't hold up, and he's told to shut up? Can you just walk through in a nutshell the Kevin Ryan story? Kevin
Ryan's a whistleblower at UL. He exposed to the public the fact that UL was hired by NIST to perform a series of 4 tests with varying degrees of fireproofing of the actual steel structure that was actually in the World Trade Center, a 35-foot span of floor trusses with 4-inch concrete over metal decking. Now, the tests were, what he showed us was that the UL tested this with 2,000 degrees of heat underneath these steel trusses and twice the known amount of loading on top. And guess what? The structure only sagged a couple, 2 or 3 inches. And NIST turned around, threw that test out the window, and used a 42-inch sag. Now, why did they do this? Probably to try to prove their effort that the sagging floor trusses pulled in the columns, and that's their overall theory, the column failure theory.
Could that cause the shattering and the beams being ejected hundreds of yards? Could that cause the pulverizing of the concrete? If we had a pancake, we'd have this big stack of concrete at the bottom, but we'll walk through all that.
Yeah, good.
Can you tell us about some of the other prominent engineering and architectural people that are now speaking out against the official story.
Most recently, we had Dr. Quintier, the former chief of NIST's Fire Science Division, calling for an independent review of the World Trade Center investigation. Now, this is no small fry. This gentleman is halfway to realizing that these buildings were demolished himself. But what he notes particularly is the deficits in the NIST review, and says that we need a complete new review. He calls for them to be unarchived, made public, and to get to obtain a new investigation. We also have Joel Hirshhorn, a PhD who served 12 years as senior staff member, Congressional Office of Technology Assessment. He's calling for a new independent 9/11 investigation, saying, first, let the technical truth emerge. Then, if necessary, cope with the inevitable political conspiracy and other questions. What we have to get down to is the science. And once you get to the science, it's indisputable. The official story is so full of non-science, of myth, of fable, that people are waking up left and right. For instance, Lynn Margolis, PhD, member of the National Academy of Sciences and world-renowned scientist, characterizes the official account of 9/11 as a fraud and is calling for a new investigation. She says, I suggest that those of us who are aware and concerned demand that the glaring, erroneous official account of 9/11 be dismissed as fraud and a new, thorough, unimpeachable investigation be undertaken. Next, we have a member of AE 9/11 Truth, J. Marks Ayers, former member of the National Institute of Science's Building Safety Council and former member of the California Seismic Safety Council, calling for a new investigation. He says it's a rallying cry for all building design experts to speak out.
Is this the way Professor Jones and many others have described this, and it really fits the bill for other scientific controversies we've seen, like when they got mad at Copernicus for saying that the world was really round, and then Galileo saying that the Earth orbited the sun, not the sun the Earth. And then for a while, the government and the media and the church at the time were able to suppress them. But then very soon it creates a debate scientifically that then verifies their discoveries. But you guys aren't even fighting over really new scientific laws. You're fighting for what's known about scientific laws and how buildings fall. Any comments just in the whole scientific debate?
You framed that well. What we're talking about is science here. Science is as old as Newton and prior. When we have a group of scientists, engineers, and architects and scholars, such as assembled by the various groups, the 9/11 Truth groups, Scholars for 9/11 Truth, Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, soon Scientists for 9/11 Truth, we have a body of evidence based on a set of scientific principles that we all agree on. So real soon here, it's going to turn over the official story, which has been proven to be not based on sets of scientific principles, but political manipulation of science. What you see when you go to the website Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, which is ae911truth.org, is a set of evidence for the controlled demolition of Buildings 7 and Buildings 1 and 2.
Really, one of the biggest pieces of proof that it's an inside job isn't just all the physical evidence, it's then how the government and the media try to cover up that evidence. That's the guilt, because it's literally acting very suspicious.
Well, for instance, John Gross denying that there's molten metal. I mean, I can go through all of that. There are numerous witnesses. We show two on the website. On the upper right-hand corner, you can see this list of evidence for controlled demolition at the World Trade Center 7 and 1 and 2. At Building 7, a 47-story skyscraper, not hit by an airplane on 9/11. It fell symmetrically, smoothly, at virtually free-fall speed into its own footprint. A perfect controlled demolition. just like all of the controlled demolitions that we've seen numerous times on TV. What are the features of a controlled demolition? One at a time, we have a rapid onset of destruction at the base of the building. Then we have two witnesses who talk about explosions, huge, bursting the windows out, and then the building comes down. That's in direct violation of the official story, which talks about fires softening the steel and then bringing the building down. Well, there's only graphic evidence for 2 or 3 fires in that building, 5th and 12th and maybe 13th floor. The Securities and Exchange Commission was on the 12th and 13th floor. These are on the north side of the building, on the far side, away from the World Trade Center tower. There was some smoke. There's evidence of lots of smoke on the south side facing the tower. The official story tells us that the steel was softened, but if that was the case and this building fell due to fires by their nature creep from place to place, leaving one area cool and burning another area, that would force an asymmetrical collapse. The building would tip over. Only a handful of companies in the United States are qualified and skilled enough to bring a building down symmetrically into its own footprint. So for the first time in history, fires have done what only a handful of demolition companies are capable of doing. And they don't always do it perfect. There are a number of rather hilarious examples of controlled demolitions gone wrong. But this one was beautiful at the World Trade Center 7, if it weren't otherwise so tragic. So we have a rapid onset of destruction at the base with these explosions. Then we have the sounds of explosions heard by the witnesses, Craig Bartner of the New York Police Department and another emergency responder. We have this symmetrical collapse. It doesn't tip over at all. It goes straight down into its own footprint. We have evidence of squibs in World Trade Center 7. These are mistimed explosions. They go off at the wrong time. Look on the website at the upper 7 stories on the right side of the building. In the flash video, you'll see poof, 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 synchronistically timed, floor by floor, puffs of dark smoke, which is also direct evidence of controlled demolition. We have the building falling into its own footprint, and as it does, there is a tremendous surge of pyroclastic dust flow, like cauliflower enfolding itself, shaped like a cauliflower. The fire is enfolding itself due to the tremendous heat. Where did that heat come from? Most controlled demolitions are produced with C4 or RDX explosives. If you want to blame a building collapse on a fire, what you'd use is something more silent, such as thermite. Thermite's byproduct is molten iron. Molten iron is 4,000 to 5,000 degrees in heat, and this produces this tremendous pyroclastic dust cloud as well. The New York Fire Department found tons of this molten iron underneath not only Building 7, but underneath Building 1 and 2 as well, flowing like lava, they say. There's numerous witnesses, including the World Trade Center structural engineer, Leslie Robertson, who was quoted as saying, 21 days after the event of 9/11, the molten metal was still running. So where does that come from? As I mentioned, the byproduct of thermite is molten metal. Thousands of cutter charges placed throughout the building would produce tons of molten metal. Now, John Gross of the NIST denies that there's any molten metal, and this is a flat lie. And as a result, the architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, as well as Stephen Jones and Kevin Ryan and other family members of those who lost their lives at 9/11, are demanding a request for correction of NIST for this point and many other points that are flawed. Why?
That's a big deal, and I'm about to say why.
Yeah.
He came to UT. He said there is no molten metal. He laughed. The people laughed. But then we have all the aerial photographs. We have the federal government releasing them, saying weeks and weeks later, over a month later, there's these molten pools. It's been a big public controversy, and they just say, hey, it doesn't exist. Can you speak? That's a big deal. And that's only, as you said, one of dozens of things where they just deny things that are publicly already admitted. I mean, they're the conspiracy theorists. Everybody knows it was molten metal. The government admitted it, took the photos, the thermal photos. What, 3 different agencies got them? I mean, talk about that specifically.
Yeah. So John Gross is denying that there's molten metal. He says there's no evidence of it. Nobody's produced it. It's a direct, bald-faced lie. And that's why we've demanded a new investigation. That's why we've also called for a request for correction of NIST. There's plenty of eyewitness reports of this molten metal. Sarah Atlas citing that there's molten metal flowing beneath my feet. We have 3 firemen on video talking about molten metal flowing like lava, and John Gross is denying that there's any evidence. We have tons of previously molten metal pulled out of the ground, sitting in aircraft hangars. They call them meteorites. There's plenty of evidence of previously molten metal, tons of it. NASA has created photos of the World Trade Center site showing areas of temperature range up to 1,400 degrees on the surface, indicating far greater temperatures below the surface. On our site, in fact, we have a photograph of the backhoe picking up a chunk of metal which is dripping with molten metal. Some of this previously molten metal was sent to Dr. Stephen Jones of Brigham Young University, formerly of Brigham Young University. He's a physicist, PhD, who analyzed the slag and the steel samples and the dust. What did he find in it? The chemical trace signature of thermite. In fact, thermate, a high-tech form of thermite with sulfur added, which lowers the melting temperature of steel. Thermite is an incendiary used by the military to cut through steel like a hot knife through butter. What he found was manganese, fluorine, potassium, and other chemicals in the correct proportion that strongly suggest thermite was used. Even FEMA found rapid oxidation, sulfidation, and intergranular melting in the ends of these beams and columns. Why is that so important? Because it's direct evidence of the use of thermate, sulfur, sulfidation. What did NIST do with this information? Nothing. They dropped it out of the whole picture in an effort to hide all of the evidence for controlled demolition. This is a crime. We have expert corroboration for controlled demolition. Danny Jawenko, a top European controlled demolition expert, cited this is a controlled demolition. A team of experts did this. Without a doubt, it's professional work. Hugo Bachmann, structural engineer emeritus in Switzerland, cited this is controlled demolition. We have foreknowledge of the collapse of World Trade Center 7. The BBC announced it, in fact, 20 minutes before it actually happened, at 5 o'clock, with Jane Stanley citing the 47-story Solomon Brothers building collapsed due to structural failure. Well, never before in history had a high-rise building collapsed due to structural failure from fires. And she's announcing it 20 minutes before it happened. Well, the BBC apologized for the mistake, citing the confusing events of the day. The firemen had pulled out all of their resources from the building early in the afternoon, and they're looking at each other wondering why they're not fighting the fire. And there's some people who are telling them the building's going to come down. Well, again, never before in history has a building come down. It's a high-rise, steel-frame, fireproofed building come down. And there's hundreds of examples, by the way. For instance, in Caracas, Venezuela, the 56-story building burned for 17 hours over 26 floors. In Los Angeles, 3.5 hours over 5 floors, the First Interstate Bank. In Philadelphia, the Meridian Plaza building burned 18 hours over 8 floors. And in New York, 50-story building, it burned for 6 hours. But these were large, long-lasting, and very hot fires. And every one of those buildings is in use today. What we're talking about is 2 or 3 small fires in World Trade Center 7, and it comes straight down symmetrically into its own footprint as a result. We don't think so. This is why we demand a new investigation of Congress with subpoena power. The gravitational kinetic energy available in the collapse of the two twin towers, for instance, has to account for one, the crushing of 80,000 tons of intact structural steel beneath it. 2, the production of molten metal, which we've talked about, tons of it. 3, the pulverization of concrete to a fine powder ranging from 10 to 100 microns in size, and some gravel. 4, the expansion of the pyroclastic dust clouds to 10 times the volume of the building. Now, the 100,000 kilowatt hour available gravitational potential in each tower cannot account for even one of these, let alone all 3. The collapse of World Trade Center 1 and 2 is quite different. Architects and engineers are not trained with controlled demolition. We have to rely on the so-called experts. And these so-called experts are highly compromised due to their $10 million contracts, some of them, Therese McAllister, Gene Corley.
All of them. Everyone I've ever seen has got
John Gross.
$3 million defense contracts, government contracts, all of them, or they were on federal boards. I mean, it's a joke.
At World Trade Center 1 and 2, we have the onset of destruction at the point of the jetliner impacts, because we're being led to believe that this was produced by fire. So what we have, instead of a classical controlled demolition of an implosion, we have an explosion, where beams and columns are dismembered from each other. These are welded moment frame connections in the core structure of the World Trade Center 1 and 2. They're blown up to 500 feet laterally, impaling themselves in the surrounding windows. There's blast waves that blew out windows 400 feet away. There are bone fragments the size a half an inch, 700 of them found on the Deutsche Bank building across the street, on that building alone. Why are they so small? A gravitational collapse cannot account for that kind of a mechanism.
Can you break that down in layman's terms, that little fires in a building collapsing, it's going to be in a big pile. It's not going to be pieces of bone blown across the street on top of buildings. I mean,
these fires were on their way to going out. The South Tower was virtually out. Chief Oreo Palmer, in fact, reached the 78th floor stating, "I can put it out with 2 lines, 2 small pockets of fires." So how did these small fires put 700 bone fragments on top of the Deutsche Bank building across the street? Bone fragments that small. A gravitational collapse would encase most of the bodies inside of it and taking it down. Of the 1,000 recorded interviews of first responders, we have 118 of them talking about explosions and flashes of light. This was only secured as a result of the New York Times suit against the city and won by the New York State Court of Appeals. Why were they trying to hide it? Because these 118 eyewitness accounts of explosions and flashes of light prior to the onset of collapse are key. At the North Tower, in the gaping hole left by the airplane, we have a woman waving for help. There's no raging inferno. So how can that fire that isn't even destroying most of the people in the building at the point of the jetliner impact hurl beams all of a sudden 500 feet laterally?
Again, the amount of energy in that fire, is it melting the humans? Is it burning the humans? Is it killing the humans? And then suddenly, right at the same point, exactly, this incredible Godzilla force is just ripping everything and blowing it sky high. I mean, it's just ridiculous. There's explosive force there and massive.
Now, I didn't say it as eloquently as you.
Incredible.
All right. Let's talk about the squibs at World Trade Center 1 and 2. 20, 40, and 60 stories below the ensuing collapse, we have sets of ejected building materials, which NIST calls puffs of air, due to the pile driver pushing down the building and creating these puffs of air down the elevator shafts and out. Well, first of all, they're not puffs of air, they're pulverized building materials. Second of all, these are explosive speeds of 100 to 200 feet per second. Third of all, there's no pile driver pushing down the building. in 4 seconds, the building mass above the point of impact is exploded and disintegrated and hurled laterally, such that after that about 4 seconds, the building's just pulling itself apart. You can see it very clearly in the videos once you look at it after you know what you're looking for. It took me 4 or 5 years to realize what was going on in the World Trade Center. It has to be explained, then you have to look at it, and then you go, aha! Also, if air was coming down the elevator shaft, filling the open space surrounding the core structure of the Twin Towers, it would fill that space uniformly and blow several windows out. It wouldn't be highly focalized explosions at the midpoint between the corners of the buildings. The science is very clear. These buildings, World Trade Center 1, 2, and 7, were controlled demolitions. And there's been quite an effort on the part of the 9/11 Commission, the FEMA, and NIST to cover up this fact. And architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth are demanding a new investigation, unimpeachable, with subpoena power for the U.S. Congress.
Richard, since you discovered this, since you found out that the official story is a fraud, how has this changed your life? How has this changed your worldview? I mean, how has this affected you?
Yeah. My life has been turned upside down by these revelations of the controlled demolitions, because the implications are far more disastrous than the demolitions themselves. Al-Qaeda didn't have access to these buildings. That can be assumed. That means somebody else did. Other than requiring a new investigation, architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth have to look at ourselves. I have to look at myself, what my role in society is. If somebody in our government was responsible for these demolitions, then everybody in America needs to know about it. And I've dedicated my life, therefore, to waking up everybody to the truth of the science of these demolitions. And we'll have to let the chips fall where they may.
You talk about turning your life upside down. I mean, is it bittersweet? Has it opened up a lot of new horizons, or from the life you had before? Now you're this national figure out there waking up so many people, or overall, are you glad you woke up, or just other thoughts on it?
I'd much rather be where I was, but you can't go back.
Why can't you go back? Some people just decide to rationalize and lie to themselves and say, no, the moon's made of cheese, George Bush is a good Christian conservative, and there's no government terrorist in history, and there's no false flag attacks, and mom and apple pie, and America can do no wrong, and hey, buildings just blow up and turn into dust and fly all over the city from little fires. Why can't you just believe the fairy tale like other people? They can. They believe Saddam had WMDs. They believe Shiites or Sunnis out there. The general public does. Why can't you just believe up is down and down is up, black is white, white is white?
The more you learn about 9/11, the more undermined your worldview gets, because everything is upside down. Relationships are changed. The world doesn't look like a safe place to bring up my son. I'm not able to go about life normally anymore. I have a job. I'll keep my job. But everything I do after that job is dedicated to waking up the American people to the truth about these demolitions, and we'll let the chips fall where they may. First, we start with the architects and engineers, because they have the necessary credibility to turn heads in the halls of Congress. So by next year, we'll have 1,000 architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, and then everybody will listen.
I think they're already listening. In just a few months, you've gotten over 160 members. You're speaking every couple of weeks, different parts of the country. You've got a documentary out. Believe me, I've already seen personally the ripples in Austin, Texas, from what you're doing, because I know engineers and architects in Austin are now looking into the claims and going, yeah, that never made sense. That is impossible. Buildings don't. It's simple. When there's an explosion. When something's blown to bits.
Yeah.
And then they pulverized Tower 1 and 2. Perfect, classic controlled demo on 7. Whoever did this, why do you think they thought they could get away with it?
There you go again. Every radio show you ask me that question. And I don't have an answer. Why they thought they could get away with it, I don't know.
The question is, will they get away with it?
Okay, I'll answer that. I don't believe that whoever pulled this farce on the American people will get away with it. People are waking up by the millions now. The 9/11 Truth movement is growing, and I am honored to be a small part of that.
But I guarantee you, if we wouldn't have exposed 9/11 as an inside job, they would have already staged more events. And that's why it's so important, Richard, what you're doing. And I know it's a sacrifice, but overall it's going to make your life a lot more fulfilled. I know it's made mine more fulfilled. And you've really helped wake a lot of people up. And so I commend you for your passion, your research, and your courage to check out the scientific facts and then to go out there and start warning the public once you had made the discovery that the official story was a fraud. So thank you so much for talking to us. Anything else you'd like to add?
I can't think of anything.
Richard Gage, thank you so much.
Thank you,
I appreciate
Alex.
that.